Should we be on this slide, Marius, or the next one?
I'm going to be on this one for, thank you for that. I'm going to jump back to a slide in a second. Welcome back, Emma.
Thank you. It's very interesting.
I see we're all making our way back. A few more are still somewhere in cyberspace between the group and the plenary. We'll give them a few more seconds to join us.
Larpile, Tati. Okay.
So welcome back, colleagues. Hoping you had an interesting discussion and had a quick moment to get to know each other a little bit and learn about one another's organization and how they think about Foresight. Just to let you know that there will be ample time in our next engagement to share more with one another and get to know each other in your groups a bit more. But we're very curious about the discussion. And we'd love to hear from a couple of you on what was shared, how Foresight is being used in your organization or how it's not being used. And so if you'd like to, who would like to unmute and or put a hand up and share from their group? And anyone is welcome, feel free. Who found that very interesting and would like to share? Pamela, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. I was in group 1, and I think we were just starting to get into some interesting discussion as the time ran out, which is the thought about with COVID, for example, whether this is going to help, is it going to be easy to use this, and will it actually help us get out of the current situation by saying, look, all bets are off, let's try something new. But I think what concerned us as a group, not concerned us, but we all recognized was that it does require an amazing commitment to be transparent and to be thoughtful rather than looking at it as a programmatic process, really looking at it as an exploration. And if the participants are not willing to do that and you can't get a stakeholder-rich process, it quickly devolves into a different process. So that was one of the disadvantage or concerns, was that how do you get the stakeholders ready and engaged and willing to take it seriously and not just see it as a box tick exercise.
That is such a wonderful comment, Pamela. Thank you for that. I put that term there in the chat, stakeholder-rich process. Some of the Foresight, the leading thinkers on Foresight would refer to Foresight as a social learning process, on the assumption that really the value is precisely what you're describing. It's that engagement, but that of course would require priming the stakeholder network, or if you look at it differently, really engaging with the true strategic conversation that's taking place among those stakeholders, or really getting to the heart of what the issues are in a way that engages them. So you're putting your finger on something quite important. And I think we're going to come back to it a number of times throughout the process. I saw a second hand. I don't remember whose it was. Who else would like to share? Othman, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. We had a very interesting discussion in the group. There was myself, I work for the International Organization for Migration, so we deal with migrants and people on the move, but also my colleague Martin works with the Ministry of Planning in Colombia. And it was interesting to see that they are already including the Foresight in their planning for their Vision 2050. And they focus on 4 areas, but also the challenges they face with so many information they receive and how to use this information. Also, we discussed maybe something we think is important about how do you convince others with your findings, especially when you talk about big organizations, parliaments, governments, when you deal with information based on views of people and not based sometimes on concrete data, and how you can really convince other groups that do not really believe in such a process to move forward, or to get the acceptance and the consensus to move forward, knowing that in some governments, we focus on short-term achievements. So if you're talking about long-term achievement and the long planning process and also using the methods of foresight, how can we benefit from that and how we can convince others to support this initiative? Thank you.
So thank you, Othman. That's such an interesting comment. And I quoted two of your comments there in the chapter. One is around foresight being included in planning. And what's interesting about foresight is you could think about foresight being included in planning. In other words, you do a strategy and a SWOT analysis and an environmental scan, and then you do foresight as part of your planning. There's another way to look at it, which is where you include planning in your foresight, which is a slightly more fundamental view of what foresight is. And this speaks to your second point, which is about how do you convince others of your findings. And so very often what you find when organizations are, or governments for that matter, are in a planning paradigm, as opposed to a foresight paradigm, when their mindset is a planning mindset, what they tend to do is they plan and then they execute. And somewhere between the planning and the execution is the stakeholder management, because their relationship with the stakeholders is once removed. They're the planners that then must execute with these stakeholders, so it happens in that sequence. When we do foresight, as we're going to see in this program, it's possible, it's not easy, but it is possible to bring your planning and your stakeholders into a conversation about the future. So in other words, when you do foresight as an ecosystem, as a stakeholder network, instead of having to convince some of your findings, what happens is the findings become their findings. They are the ones with you in a collaboration, arriving at a new set of insights and understanding. Now, let me reiterate, that's sometimes very difficult because the organization is used to planning, the government department is used to planning. And so getting them out of a planning mindset into a foresighting mindset, where what they're doing is they are together reflecting and thinking and hoping and engaging about the future, arriving at new insight, and then on the basis of that, they then develop some plans. So you're touching on a very important point. Thank you for that. I did see there was another hand, but I see Othman's hand is still up. Othman, did you have a follow-on comment, or is it an old hand?
No, sorry, it's an old hand.
Thank you, Othman. Who else would like to come in with a comment or a question? It sounds like there were some lovely conversations in the groups. Roxanne.
Yeah, hi. I work with UNDP's regional innovation team in the Arab States. I was in a group with colleagues from UN Global Pulse who are working on predictive analytics. In the Arab States, we've used quite a diverse set of futures thinking tools for everything from sort of sci-fi and speculative futures to signals mapping for country program development. And from my perspective, I mean, one thing is the fact that foresight helps us, it almost automatically helps us think beyond our silos. If we start thinking about it, it's sometimes difficult to think about the implications of our own work without sort of using some of these more systematic tools. And then once you do think of those implications, you immediately start seeing implications in sort of other program areas, and you start seeing the necessity to work closer together with other teams. I think disadvantages can be bias, so we do forget sometimes to involve to use more participatory approaches, and then we tend to maybe use a little bit of confirmation bias even in futures thinking exercises. And then the other thing is the fact that our organizational structures are not set up in a way that they allow for the adaptability that's necessary to sort of remain open to those different possible trajectories that we map out.
Thank you, Roxani. That's very, very interesting. And I like that observation of the risks, right? That not only confirmation bias, but also potentially selection bias, that we participate, but we participate with the usual suspects. And so we end up with a sort of confirmation of existing assumptions. And so one of the key principles in good participative foresight is bringing interesting people into the room, people who don't share the same worldview, don't share the same mental map, and intentionally reorganizing and shaping that participation. Colleagues, these are lovely thoughts, and we look forward to many of these kinds of conversations in the coming weeks. Let me move a little bit forward here with the slide and touch on this slide here, that when we do foresight, we are grappling with these different quadrants of agency versus uncertainty. Now, in environments where uncertainty is low and agency is low, you might say, what is the oil price going to be in the US in the next year? You might do a forecast on the basis of the range of factors that drive the oil price, supply and demand. Or if you look at factors driving electoral politics, you might look at unemployment and youth, the number of youth in the demographics to think about instability in the political system. And so forecast in a low uncertainty, low agency environment tends to be quite useful. When we move to a high agency environment, where the person doing the thinking or the planning has the power. So if you think here about a national health department planning for a regional hospital network, they might say, well, we know what the demographic growth is in a city or a region. We know what the health demands are likely to be. And so we can do a set of roadmaps of how we deliver health services to those regions or cities. But the moment we move to the right-hand side, to the high uncertainty quadrants, the tools of forecasting and road mapping or even predictive analytics can sometimes be quite limiting, because they assume that the future is in some way an extension of the past. It's sort of an unraveling of the past structural features, trends, and relationships. And so when we're dealing with high uncertainty in an environment where we have the power, where there's high levels of agency, well, then we might use alternative pathways. We might say in a particular country through a political transition where there's if you say it's a military dictatorship, they might feel like they can determine the destiny of that country and have a pathway for centralized authority, decentralized authority, devolved authority. But when you get into this bottom right-hand corner, and I mentioned the Arab Spring earlier, but that's a classic example in an environment where lots of rapid change at multiple levels of the system, economic change, political change, social change, where agency is low and uncertainty is high, then we start looking for tools that are built for uncertainty. And of course, an example of that could be scanning, monitoring, scenario planning, which takes a more open-ended view of the future and allows for that uncertainty and that complexity. And so while we use and respect all of these other tools, we're probably going to be spending more of our time on this right-hand side, top and bottom quadrant when we're doing foresight, including when we have high agency, using our foresight to drive change. Now, Peter mentioned to you the 4-stage process. We're going to reiterate this process a number of times through the program, but really the 4-stage process is at some level quite simple. How do you do foresight? Simply, you paint by numbers, scope, who's the project for, who are the stakeholders, what's the question they're asking, really making sense of understanding the question that the project is trying to ask and who is asking that question and why are they asking that question. Once we move into ordering, we have a sense of what this is going to be about, but what is it that we need to do from a methodological point of view to do that? What tools do we use? Do we use scanning? Do we use futures wheels? Do we use expert interviews? Do we use scenario planning, etc., to find the information, the data? Now, you might say, but there's no such thing as data about the future. So are we making assumptions about the future? Well, maybe we're making assumptions. We might be using propositions about the future. We might be looking at trends into the future. We might be looking at drivers of those trends. And we're doing ordering as part of making sense of that. Then we look for the implications of those insights. And this follows a really similar pattern to strategic planning that then looks to say the so what question. What are we going to do with these insights once we have them? Well, we're going to apply them to the organization, to its strategy, to its policy. And then finally, how do we integrate this competency for foresight into the institution? How do we make it part of the woodwork or part of the wallpaper so that the, right through from the secretary or the executive assistant to the CEO, to the operational planner, we speak the language of futures and complexity. How do we make that part of the culture? So in the program, we're going to be working through this process, module by module, and teaching some of the skills and techniques across the process. Now, what's interesting about this process is very often the discomfort that participants feel will increase during the course of this process. And so we talk here about what we call a divergent versus a convergent process. So at the start, we might say, as Johan was doing, what's the future of transport in the US? And then we start to investigate the ordering part of that. And as we investigate it, we start saying, well, we need to talk about road infrastructure. We need to talk about laws and regulation and fines, the price of fuel, airplanes, and the amount of complexity relevant to that question grows and grows and grows. And you get into this divergent phase of a process. Now, that divergent phase is really about expanding our choices. If you were the US government, you may have thought we have a choice between more roads or less roads. But as you do that exploration, you start realizing we have a choice between more roads, less roads, smart roads, more airports, drone airports, more bicycle lanes, more, you start to expand those choices in that particular domain. And then there's a tipping point in the process, normally, where you start to say, which of these choices would be relevant to our organization? And you start to narrow that cone and start to converge to a point where you say, based on our foresight, we think the following 1 or 2 or 3 critical strategic imperatives or critical policy insights are relevant for the future. And it's usually at that middle point. If you do a foresight process Monday to Friday, it's usually at Wednesday night over dinner with a glass of wine, where the participants have an aha moment and they go, now I understand what this all means, all of this complexity. And so even in the program, we're signaling to you that you might feel like we're going through this divergent phase. It's getting more and more complex. What does it all mean? And you can trust the process. As we get towards the second half, it will begin to converge and it will begin to make much, much more sense as we apply those insights very practically. Now, it's important to say that what's exciting here is this program comes at a time where governments and other institutions are increasingly recognizing the need for foresight. NGOs, civil society, companies, corporations, multinationals, of course, the multilateral community as well. To reiterate some of what was said earlier, it is an exciting moment for foresight in the context of the United Nations and the multilateral environment. It's a time where big questions are being asked, and big questions are being asked about the tools we use and how foresight can inform our work and make it more powerful. And so the program has been designed to really speak to your need for foresight and your need to use foresight in the context of where you are. We as SOIF are very proud to be part of this process and doing interesting work, pushing the boundaries of participative foresight around the world. One of the ways we do that is through the Next Generation Foresight Network, which are individuals all around the world who use foresight. And we're going to be connecting you with that network and bringing some of them in to share with you. And then towards the end of the program, the latter half of the program, we're really going to get into the weeds with you on what does it mean to embed foresight deeply in the organizations where you work. What does it mean to use foresight on a day-to-day basis in your everyday work? And so we look forward to exploring that with you. Now, what I'd like to do in the last few minutes we have together is to talk about the immediate next steps, what you can expect coming out of today is really an introductory session at the start of module 1. And so firstly here, you can see there on the 13th of April, we're going to have, that's of course our learning groups, the first opportunity to get together in your thematic learning groups. In that space, you're going to have 60 minutes together to share your project ideas, learn about each other's interests, and find out what you'd like to share around that. On the 21st of April, you'll have a second opportunity in your learning groups to apply some of the learning content that you would have received this week. There's a particular tool that we call a scoping circle, and we're going to be sharing that scoping circle with you, and you'll have an opportunity to apply that scoping circle in your group session. And then on the 27th of April, we're going to be discussing that scoping experience, and it'll be an opportunity for those of you working in conflict or conflict prevention, those working in development or in UN planning or country level planning or programmatic planning, to share your experiences and share your application and insights with each other, really to enhance the learning and learn from each other. Now, while I've been sharing from my side, I'm aware that you've been putting some comments in the chat. I'm not sure, Johan, if you've had a chance to read some of those questions or comments, if you'd like to come in and answer one or two or have a view of what's being shared. We may have lost Johan right at the moment where I was asking the question. That's not a problem. Let me go to the chat. I see Peter responding here to a question by Kat. Thank you, Peter, for looking after that. It doesn't look like I need to discuss that further. That's a great answer by Peter on pathways. Excellent. And thank you, Ruth, for pointing out that the time there should be 2 o'clock. And so we'll correct that and make sure you have that communication. So colleagues, our last step here for today, in the House Space platform, where we've sent you to, where all the content is, we've put a little exercise there that invites you to define foresight your way. And so based on the readings, based on your current understanding of foresight, maybe based on the 2 definitions that I shared today, how do you understand foresight? And I'm quite aware that we have people in the room that are from the future studies tradition. There's some who are from the foresight and strategic foresight tradition, and there's some who are from the futures literacy tradition. And so your perspective on foresight, what is it? We're inviting you to visit House Space. You are also invited there to go and look at the definitions of your peers, and feel free to critique them, to reflect on them, to add to them, and to comment on them, and you'll have a good time. You'll have a lot of learning coming out of that experience. And so in the last minute or so that I have left, before we close, let me go to Ruth. Ruth, any housekeeping that we need from your side?
Thank you, Marius. I'm keeping track of people that have messaged me in the chat. So thank you very much for all of your queries and feedback. I will address those in the next 24 hours. And for those of you that haven't got access to House Space yet, it's of course it's critical, so we'll fix that as well. But please continue to message me the next few minutes in the chat with any queries, and we'll sort them out for you. Thank you very much for joining.
Thank you, Ruth, for your input, and thank you for supporting us. I lost your audio there for a second. Sorry if I spoke over you. Colleagues, thank you for joining us today for this very much an opening session. We look forward to getting into the content with you. Please keep those questions coming, and remember to do those readings. We look forward to seeing you in a couple of days. Have a lovely day. If it's morning in the US, have a lovely day. Lovely afternoon for those in Europe and around the world in Asia. See you soon.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Yes, you had a question. We will be sharing the groups you are divided in when we meet next time in the learning groups. So the next session, you will know in which group you are.
I would actually have a question about that session. So are we supposed to have a calendar invite for that? Because I don't think I have that in the calendar. I mean, of course, the Zoom link is also there in the on the platform, so I can join through there, but just to ask if that should be there in the calendar.
Yes, it should be. Thank you for raising. You'll be getting that in the next day or so for, well, hopefully by the end of today, if not tomorrow, for Thursday's session, Elisa.
Okay, no worries, thanks. Just checking. Thank you so much for today and your help with this.
Hi, Ruth. Hello?
Hi, Eli.
Hello.
Go ahead.
Hi, sorry, I'm not going to be able to partake in the next session on Wednesday. How can I know my group? Should I email you separately?
You'll get that communication as well. So anyone that's not there on Wednesday will send out a mass information of who belongs to which group, and then you'll be able to connect with your group as well. So don't worry, you don't need to get in touch with us. We'll get in touch with you.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Sandor, you had a question there in the chat around the pre-learning assessment. Are you unable to edit the assessment? Is that the problem?
Yeah, I was trying to figure out if I wanted to change anything there. How could I go about doing that? I'm still not so completely sure about the project. I have a number which I'd like to focus on something relevant. So I thought I might change that as well.
Yeah, if you've got, I think there's an open text box that you should be able to add your comments in. If you still have problems with functionality around the learning assessment, then feel free to just pop something in the Q&A chat, and we'll look at your perhaps your username or something. There might be an issue there, but let us know. And if you can't tick the actual boxes, then just use the open text and we'll take it from there.
Okay, great, thanks.
Thank you.